Imagine an army marching non-stop for miles, facing brutal battles and holding out for days without rest. As enemies crumbled from hunger and weariness, Roman soldiers stood firm, ready to fight at a moment's notice. But how was this possible? What was the secret that made them so resilient? The answer was not only in training, but in something even more strategic: food. They followed a diet designed to ensure energy, strength, and recovery. What exactly did they eat to become practically invincible? Stay until the end and find out. Have you ever stopped to think about what made Roman soldiers so unbeatable? They were not only well-trained warriors, they were war machines, capable of walking more than 30 kilometers in a single day, facing brutal battles and still surviving in extreme conditions. But there is a detail that few people know. Their secret went far beyond weapons and tactics. While many people imagined that strength came only from heavy training, the reality was different. Food was a decisive factor for the soldiers to maintain energy, endurance, and muscle recovery. It was not just any diet. Each food had a strategic function, and what they ate made all the difference on the battlefield. And one of the most bizarre secrets of Roman nutrition was a food almost unknown today: alicatum. It sounds like something mysterious, but it was actually a fermented and salted fish paste, loaded with essential proteins and minerals. And why was this so important? Simple. It helped with hydration, prevented cramps, and accelerated muscle recovery. While other armies suffered from exhaustion, the Romans had an efficient fuel that kept them active for much longer. But it doesn't stop there. Another essential food was pulse, a type of porridge made from wheat or barley. If today we think of bread and meat as food for warriors, at that time it was quite different. Pulse was one of the most consumed foods because it provided stable energy without causing those peaks of hunger and tiredness. In addition, it was rich in fiber, which aided digestion and prevented stomach problems, something that could be fatal in a long military campaign. Have you ever felt that the stories you know about Rome are always the same, without the real details, emotions, and strategies that defined the greatest empire in history? With that in mind, I created the 10 battles that shaped the empire. This book gets straight to the point, clear, moving, and never-before-seen explanations of how legendary leaders turned battles into historic milestones. You no longer need to get lost in confusing reports. Click on the pinned comment and download now the 10 battles that shaped the Roman Empire. But beware, it is for a limited time. Transform the way you see history and discover what has always been missing in the narratives you thought you knew. Now comes a surprising detail. The Romans ate almost no meat. Contrary to what many people think, meat was not the basis of the soldiers' diet. This is because its digestion is slower, and the goal was to keep the body ready for action at all times. Instead, they relied on legumes like broad beans and lentils, which ensured high-quality protein and iron, essential for maintaining strength and endurance. The meat was reserved for strategic moments, such as before important battles. And there is one more genius trick that the Romans used: the famous posca, a drink made with vinegar diluted in water. Does it sound strange? Maybe, but it worked. Vinegar helped prevent infections, facilitated digestion, and even reduced muscle fatigue, something that would only be proven by science centuries later. Now think about it. While their enemies ate what they found along the way, without any criteria, the Romans followed a diet planned down to the smallest detail. This explained how they were able to overcome gigantic armies and still maintain energy, mental clarity, and strength for much longer. What is most impressive is that this diet was not based on exaggeration or luxury, but rather on simplicity and efficiency. And you know what? Today, most people eat in a completely opposite way to this. Ultra-processed foods, excess sugar, unplanned meals. Meanwhile, the Romans knew exactly what to eat to get the most out of their own bodies. Before continuing, I saw here that you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. You won't want to miss all the content about Rome that we will always be bringing. If you think that Roman soldiers and gladiators stuffed themselves with flesh to stay strong, you can forget about this idea. The basis of their diet was a wheat or barley porridge called pulse. Yes, a porridge. And believe me, this simple food was essential to transform these warriors into true machines of resistance. The pulse was easy to make, highly nutritious, and guaranteed energy for long periods. While heavier foods made the body sluggish and difficult to digest, this porridge kept the soldiers satiated, without causing that feeling of tiredness after eating. In addition, it was rich in fiber and minerals, helping with digestion and muscle recovery, something essential for those who spent the day marching or fighting. And it wasn't just the soldiers who depended on it. Gladiators also had this strategic feeding, so much so that they became known as barley eaters, since this grain was part of the basis of their diet. The idea was simple: provide long-lasting carbohydrates so that they would have constant energy in combat. But you may be wondering, why not eat meat to gain strength? The answer is simple. Meat takes time to digest and was not practical for warriors who needed to always be ready for combat. In addition, barley and other grains provided all the nutrients needed to maintain muscles and prevent extreme fatigue. Another interesting detail: gladiators knew the importance of calcium for bones, but as they did not consume milk in large quantities, they had a somewhat unusual alternative. To strengthen bones and prevent fractures, many consumed a mixture of bone ash with vinegar. It may seem strange, but this trick increased the absorption of calcium in the body. Meat was reserved for special occasions, such as before major battles. On a day-to-day basis, the Roman diet was basically vegetarian, with cereals, legumes, and olive oil, ensuring energy without overloading digestion. What is impressive is that while other peoples ate what they had available without planning, the Romans created a food system designed to ensure maximum resistance. And it worked. His soldiers could fight for hours without losing their breath, and his gladiators could endure brutal combat without faltering. Tell me here in the comments if you could live with this minimalist but extremely efficient diet. I want to know your opinion. When it comes to the diet of Roman soldiers, many people imagine banquets full of meat and bread, but the reality was quite different. The basis of the military diet was barley, a simple, inexpensive, and extremely nutritious grain. And it wasn't just a matter of practicality. This grain was the fuel that kept the Roman legions on their feet, ready for long marches and exhausting battles. The great advantage of barley was the long-lasting energy. Unlike foods that gave a peak of strength followed by a sudden drop, barley was digested slowly, ensuring disposition for hours. This made all the difference for soldiers who had to walk more than 30 miles carrying weight or fight, without passing out from exhaustion. But how did they consume this grain? They turned it into a dense porridge called pulse. The recipe was simple. They mixed barley with water and cooked it until it formed a consistent paste. It didn't need fancy spices or techniques, which made pulse the ideal food for an ever-moving army. The Romans believed that barley strengthened muscles and increased endurance, and modern science confirms that this makes sense. This grain is rich in iron, magnesium, and zinc, essential minerals to prevent fatigue and accelerate muscle recovery. In addition, it has fibers that keep digestion balanced, avoiding discomfort that could hinder the performance of soldiers. Another great advantage of barley was the feeling of prolonged satiety. With a plate of pulse, a soldier could get through the day without feeling extremely hungry. This was crucial in military campaigns, where there was not always time or conditions to stop and prepare meals. And there's one more detail. This cereal was incredibly cheap and easy to store. While other armies suffered from food shortages, the Romans ensured that their legions were always well fed. They did not rely on hunting or perishable food, which gave them a huge advantage over enemies. Gladiators also used this trick, so much so that they were nicknamed barley eaters, since their diet was based on this grain. The goal was to ensure strength and endurance for combat without overloading the body with heavy or hard-to-digest foods. But why barley and not wheat? Wheat was popular among the Romans, but barley had one advantage that made all the difference for those who needed stamina. It was more nutritious and much easier to digest. While refined wheat can cause glucose spikes and rapid energy drops, barley kept levels stable, ensuring constant strength throughout the day. In addition, barley stocks lasted much longer than other foods. The Romans knew they could rely on this grain to feed their troops, even in protracted military campaigns. The logistics of feeding was one of the great challenges of any ancient army, but the Romans had it solved. Pulse made from barley was practical, nutritious, and could be prepared with very few resources. And the most impressive thing is that this knowledge was not limited to soldiers alone. Athletes and gladiators knew that barley made them more resilient. It was not used for weight gain or to make the body bulky. Its focus was to increase the ability to withstand extreme physical exertion. While other armies faced hunger and weakness, the Romans had a strategically planned diet to keep them alert and always ready for combat. Simple, efficient, and powerful, barley was one of the pillars of Rome's military success. If you imagine Roman soldiers devouring pieces of meat after battles, you can forget about this idea. Meat was a privilege, and ordinary warriors had almost no access to it. The Roman army did not work on the basis of large banquets, but on a simple, efficient diet designed to ensure energy and endurance. What really kept them standing were cereals, vegetables, cheese, and bread. The logic was simple. The food needed to be easy to store, transport, and prepare. After all, the troops were always on the move. Meat? Very difficult to maintain and impractical for an intense military routine. During campaigns, soldiers relied mainly on pulse, barley or wheat porridge, broad beans, lentils, and cheese. When the meat appeared, it was a special event. But what did they eat when they got meat? Usually pork or mutton. Contrary to what many people think, beef was not highly valued. The ox was more useful as a pack animal than as food, and its meat was considered hard and difficult to digest. Pigs, on the other hand, were easy to raise and could be slaughtered as needed, while sheep provided both meat and wool. And don't think that Roman soldiers had noble courts at their disposal. The meat was cooked in thick broths, along with vegetables and herbs, turning it into a type of nutritious stew. This method not only improved the taste, but also made the food yield more, ensuring that everyone had at least some protein. But here comes an interesting detail. The hierarchy in the Roman army was also reflected in food. While ordinary soldiers lived on basic meals, generals and commanders ate a much more sophisticated diet. The higher the status, the more refined the food. Military leaders had access to lavish banquets with prime meats, rare poultry, and even seafood. There are records of generals eating roasted wild boars, exotic fish, and even flamingo tongues, a dish considered elite in ancient Rome. Food was more than nutrition. It was a symbol of power and prestige, and this was part of a larger strategy. Soldiers needed to be physically prepared, while commanders needed to maintain their authority. The difference in food reinforced the social structure within the army. Those who fought and marched had simple and functional meals. Whoever led and commanded feasted. Another interesting factor was the regional influence on the diet. Depending on the military campaign, the type of meat available varied. In the cold northern regions, such as Germania and Gaul, hunting was more common, and the Romans could consume deer and wild boar meat. In warmer places, such as Egypt and the Middle East, fish and dairy products were much more frequent. The Roman army was incredibly adaptable, adjusting its food according to what was available. The lack of meat in everyday life did not mean that Roman soldiers were weak. On the contrary, their diet was extremely well planned to provide constant energy and avoid fatigue. They didn't need heavy, hard-to-digest meals. What really mattered was endurance, and for that, foods like barley, legumes, and cheese made much more sense. The truth is that soldiers ate to survive while commanders ate to excel. The Roman army did not need exaggeration, but rather food discipline, and that was one of the reasons why they managed to take over the world for so long. And don't forget to grab your ebook, 10 Battles That Shaped the Roman Empire. It's important that you get it right now before the units run out. Imagine being in the middle of nowhere, marching under a scorching sun, with no shade, no rest, and with only one certainty: there are still miles ahead before finding any safe water source. How did a Roman soldier stand upright, alert, and ready to fight in these conditions? The answer may be surprising: vinegar diluted in water. It may sound strange, but this sour concoction called posca was one of the greatest secrets of the Roman resistance. While other troops suffered from dehydration and disease, Rome's soldiers had this simple but extremely effective drink. And no, it wasn't just a trick to disguise the bad taste of the water. The truth is that at the time, finding drinking water was a challenge. Most of the sources were contaminated, and drinking without treatment was practically an invitation to infections and gastrointestinal diseases. But the Romans discovered something genius. By mixing vinegar in water, they eliminated much of the bacteria and made the drink safe. But posca went far beyond a makeshift purifier. It helped with digestion, rehydrated, and even fought fatigue. The acetic acid in vinegar accelerated the absorption of mineral salts such as sodium and potassium, which are essential to keep muscles functioning in extreme effort. While the enemies were exhausted, the Romans were able to move on. And here's the most interesting thing: the sour taste of posca also had a direct effect on the brain. The acid shock on the tongue gave an instant alert to the body, awakening the senses and reducing the feeling of tiredness. In combat, that split second could make all the difference between winning or dying. The posca became the official drink of the Roman legions. Each soldier carried a portion with him and drank it throughout the day. It didn't matter if they were facing the cold of the mountains or the sweltering heat of the deserts, Posca was always present. And it wasn't just soldiers who used this trick. Gladiators also drank Posca before combat, as it helped prevent cramps and kept the body hydrated. Roman workers, who spent the day carrying stones and building gigantic monuments, also depended on this drink to withstand physical exertion. But why vinegar and not wine? The answer is simple. Wine was expensive, intoxicating, and did not help with hydration. The Posca, on the other hand, was cheap, efficient, and perfect for the day-to-day life of an army that needed to stay strong and alert. Even Roman commanders, who had access to banquets and fine drinks, often preferred Posca during campaigns. They knew that this simple mixture was more reliable than any other liquid available in the middle of a war. While many armies suffered from illness, fatigue, and dehydration, the Romans had a powerful trick on their side. The Posca not only kept the soldiers alive, but also kept them ready for any battle. If there was a drink that symbolized the resistance, discipline, and strength of the Roman Empire, it was the Posca. When talking about the diet of Roman soldiers, most people imagine rustic bread, barley porridge, and perhaps some meat. But one of the biggest secrets of these warriors' resistance lay in something that many people don't associate with brute force: legumes and oil seeds. Lentils, broad beans, walnuts, chestnuts, and almonds were an essential part of the military diet. While there is a lot of talk today about animal proteins, the Romans knew that vegetables were the key to keeping muscles strong and the body ready to face any battle. And it was no coincidence. The troops were always on the move, and the food needed to be practical, nutritious, and durable. They carried sacks of dried lentils, broad beans, and chestnuts, which could be cooked quickly or eaten raw, providing protein, iron, and long-lasting energy. Lentils and broad beans were rich sources of vegetable protein, essential for muscle recovery and to avoid extreme tiredness. While enemy armies depended on meat, which was scarce and difficult to store, the Romans ensured their nutrition with food that was easy to transport and full of benefits. But it wasn't just protein that mattered. Nuts, such as walnuts and almonds, were true superfoods for soldiers. Small, light, and extremely caloric, these seeds provided quick energy, ensuring endurance for long marches and intense combats. And here's a detail that shows just how advanced the Romans were. They understood the power of healthy fats. While other armies ate only what they could hunt, the Romans included nuts, chestnuts, and olive oil in their diet, ensuring a balance of carbohydrates, proteins, and good fats. Before grueling marches, it was common for soldiers to eat a handful of chestnuts or walnuts, as they knew it would keep them satiated and energized for much longer. During the moments of rest, they prepared lentil and broad bean stews, ensuring strength for the challenges of the next day. But it wasn't just soldiers who followed this strategy. Gladiators also adopted this diet, as they needed endurance and quick muscle recovery for the brutal combats in the Colosseum. The Romans knew that a well-fed body was a strong body. They didn't have to rely on lavish feasts or meat in abundance. The real strength was in the clever combination of simple but highly nutritious foods. Another interesting point was the durability of these foods. Unlike meat, which spoiled quickly and required salt to preserve, broad beans, lentils, and oilseeds could be stored for months without losing their properties. This allowed the legions to take a reliable source of nutrition anywhere. In addition to the practicality and energy they provided, these foods also helped with digestion. While diets high in meat and heavy fats could cause intestinal problems, the combination of legumes and nuts kept the digestive system functioning efficiently. This was essential for soldiers who spent days marching out, with no time to deal with indispositions. The Romans may not have had the modern scientific knowledge, but their instinct and experience led them to create one of the most balanced diets in military history. While other armies suffered from poor food, the Romans stood out for their endurance and physical strength, all thanks to well-planned nutrition. While many armies suffered from poorly planned diets and weak soldiers, the Romans understood that food was a decisive factor in warfare. They didn't need feasting or extravagance. All it took was the right combination of food to turn an ordinary man into a soldier ready to conquer the world. War is not won only with swords and shields. A soldier can be strong, skilled, and courageous, but without food, he is nothing but an easy target. The Romans understood this early on and made food a secret weapon. While their enemies crumbled from hunger and weakness, Rome's soldiers stood firm, fed, and ready to fight. Unlike other peoples who depended on hunting and luck to find food, the Romans had a plan. They didn't march expecting to find food on the way. They took their own food. Their armies were stocked with well-organized stocks of grain, dried vegetables, cheese, oilseeds, and even salted meat on special occasions. There were no unforeseen events. There was always something to eat. Now, compare that to the barbarians. These savage warriors could be brutal in combat, but their feeding was chaos. They relied on hunting and looting for food, and when food was scarce, their performance dropped dramatically. In protracted battles, while the enemy fainted from hunger, the Romans held firm. And it wasn't just a matter of having food. The Roman diet was balanced and efficient. While other armies ate meat when they could and starved when there was no game, the Romans maintained a stable diet based on long-lived carbohydrates, vegetable proteins, and healthy fats. The secret was in the grains. Barley and wheat provided constant energy, lentils and broad beans provided protein for the muscles, and nuts and olive oil provided essential fats for physical endurance. This combination meant that Roman soldiers did not have sudden drops in energy and could fight for hours without feeling weak. But the Romans' eating strategy went beyond the choice of food. They knew how to store and transport their supplies like no one else. Dried grains could last for months, cheese was preserved in oil, and the famous posca, a mixture of vinegar and water, prevented contamination and quenched thirst better than water itself. Another impressive detail was the soldiers' food discipline. Each legionnaire was given a specific amount of food and knew exactly how to consume it to maintain energy throughout the day. There was no waste, there was no uncertainty. They ate enough to keep themselves at their maximum strength level. Now think of the advantage this gave in battles. In prolonged sieges, as the enemies grew weaker and weaker, the Romans maintained their resistance. On long marches, they could cross great distances without collapsing. When they finally met their opponents, they weren't worn out. They were ready to win. The Romans also knew that sick soldiers did not win battles. Therefore, their diet not only gave energy, but also prevented diseases. While other armies suffered from food poisoning from consuming spoiled meat or contaminated water, the Romans had a diet planned to avoid these risks. Another decisive factor was the ability to adapt. If they didn't have wheat, they used barley. If there was a lack of meat, they compensated with lentils and broad beans. This flexibility allowed the Roman legions to continue advancing, regardless of the territory they were in. And this was not only a matter of nutrition, but also of morals. An army that knows it will always have food fights with more confidence. While their enemies were worried about what they were going to eat the next day, the Romans were focused on winning. In the end, the sword and shield were only part of the victory. The Romans' true strength was in the way they prepared, and food was one of the most lethal weapons they possessed. While many armies perished from starvation, Rome grew, conquered and dominated. If there was an empire that knew how to use food as a tool of war, it was Rome. Roman soldiers were not just disciplined warriors, they were machines of resistance. They marched for days, fought for hours, and still had the energy to keep going. But this wasn't magic, it was strategy, and food was part of the plan. Today, most people experience fatigue in the middle of the day, have sudden drops in energy, and rely on caffeine or sugar to keep going. But the Romans, more than 2,000 years ago, already knew how to keep the body functioning in its best state. Can the secret of their strength be applied today? The answer lies in what they ate. No processed foods, no exaggerations, no empty calories. Their diet was designed to provide stable energy, endurance, and muscle recovery. Look at the basis of their diet. Complex carbohydrates. Barley, wheat, and lentils guaranteed long-lasting energy. Vegetable proteins. Broad beans and legumes helped build muscle without overloading digestion. Good fats. Walnuts, almonds, and olive oil kept the body functioning without spikes and dips in energy. Now, compare that to what we eat today. Fast food, soft drinks, white flour, and refined sugar. The result? Constant tiredness, lack of focus, and health problems. The Romans didn't just eat to satisfy their hunger, they ate to be stronger. Each meal had a purpose: to sustain the body, keep the mind alert, and ensure that they could withstand maximum physical effort without collapsing. And modern science confirms that they were right. The whole grains they consumed prevent glucose spikes, vegetable proteins favor digestion, and good fats help with endurance. They had a perfect balance, even without knowing anything about advanced nutrition. Another point that makes all the difference: the Romans were not nibbling all the time. Their meals were well distributed throughout the day, without excesses, without binge eating. They knew exactly what to eat and when to eat it, and we can't forget about hydration. While many people today live dehydrated without realizing it, the Romans drank posca, a mixture of water and vinegar that helped keep the body balanced and prevented food poisoning. Now, the question is, does our modern diet make us stronger or weaker? If we look at Roman soldiers, the answer is obvious. The human body was not made to live on sugar, refined flours and ultra-processed foods. He needs real food, the kind that sustains, nourishes and maintains energy throughout the day. The Romans understood this 2,000 years ago. Maybe it's time for us to relearn from them. Now you know what made Roman soldiers real war machines. They relied not only on weapons and training, but on strategic feeding, which gave them constant energy and extreme endurance. While other armies suffered from starvation and lack of organization, the Romans had a balanced and efficient diet, ensuring that they were always ready to fight. They didn't need over-the-top feasts or meat all the time. The basis of the diet was simple, but powerful. Barley and wheat provided long-lasting energy. Lentils and broad beans provided essential protein, and good fats, such as nuts and olive oil, helped with physical endurance. Each meal was designed to keep the body strong and prepared for maximum effort. And remember, whenever you want to know how Rome became the largest empire in antiquity, just go to the pinned comment and get your digital book, The 10 Battles That Shaped the Roman Empire. Get it right now because the units are limited. This knowledge, used more than 2,000 years ago, still makes sense today. Eating in a balanced way, avoiding processed foods and focusing on real nutrition can transform the body and mind. If you like this content, subscribe to the channel and enjoy the video to help bring this information to more people. See you in the next one.